Hello, Dark Reader, and welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. Today on this minisode, we're going to be looking at Vampires of El Norte. This is by Isabel Cañas, who also wrote The Hacienda. So I did not read The Hacienda, but I did hear really good things about it. Actually, to be perfectly honest, when I read the description of it, I was like, there is so much shit going on in this book. So I just didn't pick it up. I thought it was going to be muddled, but it's got some great reviews. So I decided to put this one on my TBR list, and it just happened to pop up one of the first things on my library. So I kind of ate it up. No pun intended, because of vampires. That's funny. All right. So right off the bat, because I like to be transparent with y'all, I gave this book a 3.5, probably leaning on the higher end. I really enjoyed this book, but just a fair warning here. I think it's a great book, but I don't think this is considered a horror novel. And we will get into this. If anything, I definitely think this might lean more like a southwestern historical gothic novel. It yearns, there's melancholy, bits of horror and darkness, humanity, and set on the southwestern 1800s Mexico during the Mexican Revolution. So it's got a lot of cool gothic elements, but definitely not horror. So I walked into this thinking I would be scared, but I wasn't. So there you go. Let me talk about the summary real fast. I'm going to read exactly what it says on Amazon, so it'll give you some insights as to why some people might be a little mad as far as this being advertised as horror. Let's begin. So it says, vampires and vaqueros face off on the Texas-Mexico border in the supernatural Western. As the daughter of a rancher in 1840s Mexico, Nenya knows a thing or two about monsters. Her home has long been threatened by tensions with Anglo settlers from the north. But something more sinister lurks near the ranch at night. Something that drains men of their blood and leaves them for dead. Something that once attacked Nenya 9 years ago. Believing Nenya dead, Nestor has been on the run from his grief ever since, moving from ranch to ranch, working as a vaquero. But no amount of drink can dispel the night terrors of sharp teeth. No woman can erase his childhood sweetheart from his mind. When the United States invades Mexico in 1846, the two are brought abruptly together on the road to war. Nenya as a curandera, which is a healer, and I apologize if I said that incorrectly. So she's just trying to prove her worth to her father so that he does not marry her off to a stranger. And Nestor as a member of the auxiliary cavalry of ranchers and vaqueros. But the shock of the reunion and Nenya's rage at Nestor for seemingly abandoning her long ago is quickly overshadowed by the appearance of a nightmare-made flesh. And unless Nenya and Nestor work through their past and face the future together, neither will survive to see the dawn. All right, so it seems like there's this, build up. We've got some history. We definitely have this, oh, you're doomed because the vampires are definitely coming in and encroaching. But it's not entirely the case. So let's just briefly talk about Isabel Cañas because she's really cool. She's a Mexican-American speculative fiction writer. She's lived in a lot of cool places, so that includes Mexico, Scotland, Egypt, Turkey, New York, and so many more. Wow. Another cool thing is that she lives in the Pacific Northwest. Hooray! Oh, fellow Pacific Northwesterner! She holds a doctorate in Near Eastern languages and civilizations and writes fiction inspired by her research and her heritage. I really, really like this because it does seem very apparent. I think she has done a lot of research specifically about the Mexican Revolution, the Mexican-American War, and that whole time period in Southwestern America and in Mexico. It's very cool. Like I said in the very beginning, I gave this book about a 3.5, but I don't think this is a horror novel. This is a romance first, a historical fiction second, and maybe a horror at the very end, just like a dish of it. A touch. It's not super spooky, But I have to say, the description of her vampires is some of the most refreshing vampires I have seen in a long, long time. And in fact, I would not mind if she made a second novel and expanded on all of this. Isabel, please do it. Anyway, so her vampires are pretty cool. I gotta give her that. So I guess you can say, in a way, the horror might be that colonialism is the real horror. It's like this metaphor. In fact, I don't even think it's quite a metaphor. It's quite real in this novel, where we have these Yankees who are trying to take over these places, these ranches in Mexico, and leaving families, leaving bloody trails behind. So in a way, they might be the vampires truly of El Norte. Perhaps that's what Isabel was trying to get at, and I don't necessarily mind that. So Isabel's writing I really liked overall. I was fully immersed in the world. She was not too wordy. Everything was beautifully written, just this huge landscape of where they live, the characters involved, the feelings as well. It's just really, I don't know, I really enjoy the way she writes. The pacing was fairly steady, meaning, so it was really fast-paced, but there were some pockets where it did feel a little slow, but it was still a fairly natural progression of just storytelling. You know, we've got like that heart racing, oh my god, they're, you know, the bad guys are gonna get them, and then, you know, it starts to slow down, and then it picks up, and it felt really natural. And that's something I want to touch on too, is that I feel like the authenticity of this novel overall is fantastic, and that includes the characters. One of my biggest gripes, and something I've actually kind of seen on some of these Goodreads reviews, is that they don't like the trope where basically a romance or a conflict could be alleviated if people would just communicate. And that the whole conflict of the story rides on the fact that nobody is actually talking to each other. And in a way, I can see what they're saying with this novel, because Nenya and Nestor have a problem with communication. But the thing for me is that I feel like it's pretty justified because of their trauma. And that comes off, I mean, that's pretty right away as far as like why they might do these things and what kind of people they are. I think it's pretty apparent. So I also dislike that trope, but I think it actually kind of works in this book. I was fully invested in especially our protagonist right away. So Nenya was a really fun character to kind of see her viewpoint. So each chapter is divided by, like, we have a Nenya or a Nestor, and it's both of their perspectives. Sometimes they will overlap, so it'll be like Nenya going through and, you know, talking about certain things, and then we'll see Nestor's perspective. It might be the same event. So I liked how all of that's flowed together, because we really get to see what each character is about, what their inner feelings and thoughts are. And I really enjoyed that we didn't need to complicate the story by adding a ton of characters. There's a ton of like these backdrop characters, like Nenya's family, her brother, and relatives and the other people there, Nestor and some of the other vaqueros and other characters, but it's truly about Nestor and Nenya. We start the story with basically Nenya and Nestor are off treasure hunting. They've heard all of these folk tales from their abuela about all of these things. And then Nenya is attacked by a vampire. Nestor manages to pull her out, and she isn't left for dead. He delivers her to her parents, and her parents actually declare her dead, which prompts him to leave for 9 years, thinking that she is dead. He's stricken with grief. He doesn't want to deal with it. He just drowns his sorrows, as I think I probably would too. And Nenya feels incredibly, she feels betrayed, abandoned. And that whole development for each character is really apparent. So we have Nenya, who's over time more and more resentful, especially the fact that now she is being forced to prove herself to her father and she doesn't want to just get married to some stranger. So it's a lot of these like complicated feelings. And then we have Nestor, who is, running away from his problems. And then when he comes back, reality slaps him in the face when he sees that Nenya's alive. And now he has to come to terms with the actions, like what he's done and not staying. And Nenya does not shy away from that. So they're both really complicated characters in this really interesting historical backdrop. So one thing I really wanted more focus on is Nenya's journey to being a healer. So they both, Nestor and Nenya, go to this battleground, and I was kind of hoping we'd get to see more of like Nenya's grandmother's teachings and lessons. We get a lot of that in the forefront of the book, but then as the book starts to pick up and they have to survive, get back home, it stops becoming an important thing, even though that's kind of what her entire life was about, was being this curandera and helping out on the battlefield and helping her village. So that was one of my little irks that I had with this novel, was like, okay, we dropped that. So in some ways you can see that this has a lot of those gothic elements of yearning and melancholy, especially just like those deep, like that emotional turmoil in a lot of gothic novels, with that dark backdrop, which it does occur, but not as often as I would hope, especially in more gothic novels. The supernatural bits of the novel, I feel like, could have been buffed up a little bit. The vampires themselves, like some of the confrontations that they have with the vampires, are really terrifying in a lot of ways. There was a period where it kind of got a little dull, and there was things that I really wish that I knew about. Like, one of my biggest questions was that Nenya was actually bitten. It's a huge part of this novel, where she's got like this scarring, and she survives this whole ordeal. And one thing that their village is having to deal with is like this illness that happens overnight, as people will be injured or bit or whatever by these weird bat-looking creatures, and they are suffering from despair, and some of them are left for dead. And I'm just, I'm trying to figure out like how people become vampires. Is it like a virus? Are you infected? Is it something that because obviously it has to be a traumatic experience, that sort of thing, but like it felt more than just this traumatic experience. It felt like there was an actual supernatural disease that was affecting all of these people that were getting bit by vampires, and that was part of Nenya's ability to being a healer, was being able to figure out what the sickness was. But then I never really understood why she was able to overcome this sort of like grief illness. So that was something I just really wish we had more of, but instead we get a lot more about Nestor and Nenya and their romance and saving their heritage and their home from Anglo settlers. So even though there were obvious flaws, and I think there's some really just blatant ones that feel a little misleading as far as what the kind of book is, I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for what it was. Definitely a romance in the forefront, kind of historical and barely paranormal. I still enjoyed it. I enjoyed the complexity of the characters. That's why I give this book about a 3.5. This is probably a light supernatural Western. If you want to get an introduction to that sort of genre, I think this would be a really cool one, because you just get an essence of it. And if you don't mind romance, or if you really like it, this would be really fun. It's a bit of a darker romance, or at least a romance with a dark backdrop. It's pretty fun. So if that's also something that you are enjoying as well, check out Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas, and I'm going to go check out The Hacienda as well. Even though I thought it was a little crazy pants, the description, it's got great reviews. If you are looking for some other spooky reads, make sure to join us every Wednesday for our curated long podcast episodes where we give you new books to read every single week, and for every single month. They're all dark, they're all horror, supernatural, gothic, serial killer thriller, all of that stuff. Stay tuned for some Mondays and Fridays, and make sure to join us on our socials on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at Dark Side of the Library. We are doing a Hocus Pocus cook-along, so join us over on Facebook if you want to learn how to make some cool treats this Halloween season. And check out our Amazon Live channel at amazon.com/live/Dark Side of the Library. We do like to live stream, especially as Halloween approaches. We're going to be featuring all kinds of spooky stuff, not just books, but other things like toys, presents, decorations. So if that's your kind of thing, make sure to follow us there. Thanks so much for listening. Have a creeptastic rest of your week.